Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider.
So we went and saw Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. The kids loved it. It was fun and it was ridiculous.
Yes.
I don't know if you can say I cried, but an actual tear went down my face.
Did it really?
Yeah, so...
It's also allergy season, though.
Squirrel, one of the things that I have really struggled with in my life is the fact that when it comes to really serious things in my life, I can't cry. We had a rough night the other night when we went to dinner. We talked about some hard things, and I was like on the verge of tears not the whole time, but a couple of times, and they just wouldn't come. And then I'm sitting and watching this silly movie, and a tear rolls down my face, and it bothers me that that's the case. So.
Hello, and welcome back to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. Woo! I'm your host, Sarah Westbrook, joined by the woohooer Mason Westbrook as my co-host.
Yeah.
So we are talking about Undue Influence today.
Right, so this is the second one in our cult series, so yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of dig into this a little bit. Our intent is to help our listeners identify and better understand what undue influence is. We're going to provide some examples of it as we see it in the Mormon Church. And then I think the final piece, which is really important, is for us to be able to say, what can I do when I catch myself utilizing undue influence to get somebody to do things my way? Because frankly, we are all guilty of it at one or many, many times in our lives.
Parenting, maybe.
Right.
Certainly seen that, yeah, in myself.
Certainly done it, right? Okay. And then what to do when we recognize it in somebody else.
Yeah.
And when, really not when we see it in somebody else, but really when it's being acted upon us, when we're the victims of somebody trying to do these things.
Well, and one of the things that we talked about in the last one was that oftentimes this is very subtle. And so once you start to recognize these little things going on, it can help you kind of see that there's a bigger picture of the same thing. And wow, is that a little scary?
Yeah.
A little difficult to deal with, to think that you as a smart person, I know I've struggled with this immensely, that me as a smart person was in this situation where I was being manipulated and didn't even know it.
Right.
That's hard.
Well, and I would say that when I was at the very end of my Mormon journey, one of the things that really got me was the scripture, by their fruits ye shall know them. And for years and years and years, I had been taught to only look at the quote unquote good fruit. So look how much we serve, look at all of these values that we teach. And then it took me a little while to kind of back up and identify and I'm going to read these off. So this is coming from the worksheet that we talked about in our introduction to the cult series episodes.
It was the one that dropped last week.
Right. So the one from last week. So this is the worksheet, Undoing Undue Influence and the Bite Model. This can be found at the freedomofmind.com website, which is kind of the home base for Steven Hassan. And as I said last week, one of the things that I really like about the work that Steve Hassan has done is that he has taken the really kind of like the raw data, the heavy research and, clinical verbiage and made it very user friendly.
Made it possible for someone like me to read it.
Well, and even
glean
me
from it. Yeah.
this isn't something I had to like break apart to understand.
Right.
Which a lot of times the studies and the information can be really technical jargon.
Oh yeah. Both
so
of
I
us
really
spent
like
time
this.
in our schooling just learning how to break apart the technical jargon so we could see how good the research was.
Right. So both of us spent time in school learning how to talk like we were the smartest people in the room with all that technical jargon. So here we go. Okay. So Steven Hassan says people can be unduly influenced by deception, flattery, trickery, coercion, and other techniques, including hypnosis. And then in a court of law, undue influence is a legal term which involves a person or group taking advantage of their position of power over another person or persons. And so for me, when I was leaving the church and I was looking at by their fruits ye shall know them, the reason was I started to see the deception, the flattery, the trickery, the coercion. They talk about hypnosis, and it's not so much hypnotics that the Mormon church uses, but kind of that syrupy tone of voice that is utilized. You can definitely hear it in general conference, where you kind of get lulled into that half listening brain space. And that's a form of soft hypnosis. And I don't remember what Luna Corbden talks about, because I know that they identified it in their book as well.
Okay.
So that's something that we'll have to get back to you. And so for me, the other piece of it that was really like by their fruits was because of my position as a counselor, and because I was Mormon at the time, I got a lot of referrals from LDS Family Services to provide counseling as a LDS competent counselor.
Right. I remember.
And I still get those referrals. So, I mean, the church, at least in this area, still sends people to me because I am considered culturally competent to meet those in and out of or influenced by the Mormon church. But one of the things that I started to see was that as people were struggling with their testimonies, undue influence, and I'm going to just kind of jump right into a quote mid-sentence here on this worksheet again. Undue influence was being used to cheat people out of their inheritance or property, break up families, deceive members into thinking that extreme shunning of close family members and friends is a loving act. And I've actually had my family do that to me recently. A few days ago, I got uninvited to a family wedding because my presence there would make my parents so anxious that nobody would be happy at the wedding. And so I was uninvited. My family was uninvited. Not that they expected me to do anything, dramatic or out of the norm, but just my presence of being there. And so my family gets excluded so that my parents aren't super anxious. Well, my parents are super anxious because I've started talking out loud about the abuse and neglect that I've received. And so it's because I've started speaking up as the victim, it's caused this huge rift. And that's not directly in my family. That anxiety is not directly related to my membership of the church. Most of my siblings are out. But rather an example of my parents reaching out to my siblings and complaining and venting and expressing just how terrified they're going to be if I'm sitting there at this family wedding, to the point where they pestered my siblings enough that the bride had to call me and say, because the bride is my sister, the one I still have a relationship with.
Right, the only one that you still have a relationship with.
The only one that I still have a relationship. And they called her and complained to her so many times that she called me and said, Sarah, I can't tell mom and dad to knock this off because they don't get it. You're the only one mature enough to know that me asking you this is really because myself and my fiance just want to have a great wedding, and we don't want to have to keep, managing all of this stupidity on our day that we're trying to celebrate, can you please just not come so that everybody will calm down?
Score one for maturity.
Right. And then I get a message from my mom a few days later, because I called them out on it. I said, just so y'all know, the Westbrooks have been uninvited. And this just goes to show how dysfunctional and immature the Lee family is. This is absolutely pathetic. And then I also said something along the lines of the people that get hurt the most are the bride and the groom, because they're caught in the middle of this thing that has nothing to do with them. And my children, who were super excited to see their favorite aunt get married. So then I get an email from my mom later that tells me the reason I'm so anxious was because the last time we talked, you had, your countenance had changed. And it made me really uncomfortable and you were really angry. So the last time you visited your grandma and grandpa, which was a few weeks ago, I was at my house terrified, and your sister saw that and saw just how much you being even close caused a problem, and then gave it that you need to forgive your dad and I for who we were versus who we are now. And my thought is who you are now is somebody who was willing to break up a family.
Right.
So that you feel more comfortable because you're not grown up enough to manage your own anxiety and your own triggers.
Yes.
I share this story here, this undue influence, because it's a really good way to kind of let those who are not part of the Mormon community in on how this works. So my understanding of what went on behind the scenes was both of my parents talked to multiple times, vented to multiple times my 3 other siblings until one brother said he was thinking about not coming. My other sister said she wasn't sure how she was going to manage it. So then the bride gets my mom, my dad, my brother, and our other sister all on her with,
Yep.
If Sarah and her family come, everybody's going to be stressed out. The loving thing to do is to let mom and dad be there without anxiety, rather than, hey, mom, you're going to maybe you should go talk to somebody and work through that. So that's that undue influence. The undue influence is my parents pestering and wearing down the siblings until the sibling does what they want so that they get their way.
This is scriptural. Let me read it.
Go ahead.
From the Book of Mormon, 1 Nephi chapter 4, verse 13. Behold, the Lord slayeth the wicked to bring forth his righteous purposes. It is better that one man should perish than that a nation should dwindle and perish in unbelief.
So it is better to cut out the person that makes you uncomfortable than it is to what?
Well, and that's of course not what the verse means. The verse does not mean cut out the person that's uncomfortable.
You're definitely taking that out of context.
Right, but that is how it is used. Same with, and I'd have to find it, I will here, but in the New Testament, Jesus says, if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, lest it corrupt the rest of the body, basically is what it's saying. And it's used to justify cutting people out because they might contaminate the rest of what's going on. And so that's part of that. You're getting scriptural backup,
right,
to cut people out rather than to seek out and love and learn and grow. Like if you're super anxious because some person is around you, fine, but you don't fix that by cutting that person out, at least not initially.
Right.
You fix yourself. You work on what your triggers are and what you can do, and then you're in a better place to work out the rest of it.
Right. Absolutely. And you know, just for the listeners, I'm going to do a little self-justification here. I gave my parents the rough draft of my book so that they could read it, so that they would know what was in it before it came out, so that they could see I was not misrepresenting what occurred. And my mom couldn't get through the first chapter because she said I made her out to be an evil, horrible, angry person. And I was, for me, it was, well, Mom, that's who you were when I was small. And so again, I think the church, one of the issues with undue influence is that the Mormon church also models a lack of taking accountability when you are in the wrong.
Yeah.
And what we learned from John and Julie Gottman is that you can't heal wounds unless you're willing to take accountability. But with undue influence, what we do is that people will give these vague examples. So like in the example of my parents or my mom's email to me recently, it was basically, you need to forgive your father. You don't know where he came from or what he's been through or the man he is today. And I'm like, actually, I do know quite a bit about where he came from. I do know that he's gotten better, but that doesn't mean that he gets to abuse me and my kids when every time I'm with him, and that I'm just going to turn a blind eye to that. The issue isn't not forgiving. The issue is not trusting. But in order to really get that way, we have to, as the victims of undue influence, identify this pattern of coercion, deception, flattery, trickery, love bombing, these techniques that we use to try and distort somebody else's reality in order to get them to do what you want them to do. Because in that email from my mom, she wants me to focus on how awful I was in a counseling session, but they are not willing to take. And I was angry. I'm going to say that I was angry. I was calm, but I was very direct. I didn't let any of that emotional, basically the manipulation that she was trying to utilize, I wasn't buying into. Therefore, I was the problem.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize when someone is saying, hey, we need to mend a fence, and someone is saying, you need to go fix the fence. There's a big difference between those two things, and recognizing that. And it might be helpful for us to hear what you responded, because it was very, well, like you said, you were angry. I don't think that the message reads angry, but this is what I wanted to say. You said that your mom couldn't get through the first chapter because she felt like you were playing her off to be an evil person, and that's not what you did at all. What you did do is accurately portray your impression of what your mom was like when you were a kid. And what your mom was like was an overwhelmed parent who didn't know how to respond, who was not in a place that she really wanted to be, and she couldn't handle it. And until she can recognize and have grace for herself that that's what was going on, she's never going to be able to recognize that that's not what you did. You did not portray her in an evil way or as an evil person, simply as the reality that existed for you.
Yeah.
And if she can't accept that, she won't be able to work through that and become a different person.
Right. Well, and I wanted to utilize this example because at the end of the episode, I wanted to be able to illustrate what do you do when you catch yourself utilizing deception, flattery, trickery, coercion, or, other things to lord over somebody or to get what you want, but also then what to do when somebody is doing it to you when you're the victim. So I'm actually going to save my response for the end as an example, and we'll kind of tie out this episode. But let's get into our examples.
Well, you had some examples. That's what I was
right.
I've got
some examples from Mormonism. So I want to burn through these really quickly because we've got some sound bites from David Bednar, who is an apostle in the church hierarchy, the Mormon church hierarchy, which means he is within the top 15 leadership. So in Mormonism, for those of you who are not familiar, you have your prophet. He's top dog number 1. Then you've got his 2 counselors. That would be top dog 2 and 3. And then you have 12 apostles. And there's a president or an acting president of the 12 apostles. I'll claim that dude as top dog number 4. And the rest of them, based on their seniority.
They become the top 15.
Right, the top 15. And they're based on who's been there the longest, has the most seniority, and the prophet has been there the longest always.
For Mormonism, they're considered prophets, seers, and revelators. You don't get any higher than that.
Right. Yeah. And in Mormonism, you become the next prophet when the previous prophet dies, and you're the most senior member of the group of the 15 men, or the remaining 14 men. So my first example, if I take this, is deception. And the biggest one is, for me, is the church purposefully hiding difficult church history. And so these are things from, what we'll say, quote unquote, minor things like Joseph Smith using a rock and a hat to translate the Book of Mormon or dictate the Book of Mormon.
Right.
Rather than utilize the gold plates to translate the Book of Mormon. That was not a story that I knew about until I was in my mid-30s, because from the time I was little, all of the artwork and all of the stories and everything talked about the plates being on a table and a blanket being between them.
Not the story that they told.
Right. Yeah. They nobody ever mentioned a rock and a hat, all the way to things like Joseph Smith married 14-year-old girls and already married women.
And a lot of times under coercion. I would just add one little piece
there. And definitely
there.
under coercion.
Yeah.
And we're going to actually bring that back up when we get to coercion.
I would add one little piece. You said that this is the biggest example of deception for you. And I don't know that for you or me that's actually the case, but this is a big example of deception because each of us are going to find different things that maybe rank higher. This isn't about rank. This is just examples of what's going on.
What I said was, what I meant, not what I said, but what I meant was, I think the easiest place to say, hey, the Mormon church is deceptive is how much effort it puts into hiding its uncomfortable things in church history.
Perfect.
I mean, even something as simple as I went all the way through seminary and everything. I'd never heard of the Mountain Meadows Massacre until I think it became a big story in the media. And one of our leaders, prophets or apostles, talked about the Mountain Meadows Massacre in General Conference. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. And I went in and looked at and researched it and was horrified.
Right.
And so then again, one of those, I'll say maybe under trickery with that, is that the Mormon church performed this nice little act of trickery and blamed that massacre on the Paiute Indians in Utah in order to escape the blame for that slaughter. And so these are things that...
Well, that's a complicated story, but the point here today for Undue Influence is that it is a complicated story. They're not talking about it. They're hiding these things. They're tricking us into believing that we've been told when we haven't been told, all those things. Yeah. So what's the next one there?
The next one is flattery.
Flattery.
And I think that the church does this...
flattery will get you everywhere.
Love bombing. So as we go out to recruit new members or as we move in, Mormons have a tendency to meet non-Mormon people and do extra acts of service, give lots of compliments, be overly friendly and kind and generous. But then when that individual is not willing to pursue missionary discussions and whatnot, we have a tendency to not necessarily end the friendship, but it just dies off and withers away because there's no more attention. Time for a commercial break. We'll be right back.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Well, we do this in lots of different ways. If you go back to the podcast about the letter my aunt sent me, she said a couple of times, this is all just in love. I just love you and I want you to do the right thing. So it's all this extraordinary expressions of love in different ways, in an effort to get you to accept what they're telling you.
Right. Well, and my mom did that in this email. She says, I pulled up this email that she sent me.
I want to wrap you in a hug.
My heart is full today as I sit down to write you. It's been almost a year since we stopped talking. And then she says, let's see, I love my oldest child with all of my heart. How can I be afraid of seeing her again, of being in her presence and expressing of my love by wrapping her in my arms and soothing her with a loving embrace? And I found that very off-putting because I don't remember any time where my mom wrapped me in her arms to soothe me. It was very much, you go away and cry, and when you're ready to come talk to me, come talk. So that was when she's writing this in here. It felt very unnatural. Now, I know that so many people would love to hear that. And that's the problem with love bombing, is that love bombing meets an emotional need. And so when my mom says, I want to, embrace you and wrap you in my arms and love you and soothe you, the only reason it feels really off-putting to me is that is really unnatural. That's not my mom.
Well, it also bypasses the whole real issue. You can talk about how you want to hug and love and blah, 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 make everything better. But if you're not willing to do the things that actually will make it better, it's a bypass. I want you to know, if I could, I would be there and I would hold you and I would make this all better. But the problem is, you could be there. You could be doing those things. You've chosen not to because you don't want to put in the effort to become a different person to actually love, not pretend to love.
Right. And then the other thing that happens a lot, and this is kind of in that trickery, which is our next one. So I'll give you the example here, is that in my mom's email, she says, and because I don't want to give out the names, the bride and the groom counseled together and made the decision presented to you earlier this week, which is, please don't come to our wedding. And then my mom says, and since then I have felt miserable that you will not be at this momentous occasion in her life and that I am partly to blame. And really, I'm like, you aren't partly to blame. You and Dad are to blame because you're the ones, according to my sister when she called me, it has been an ongoing, constant pestering for months that my mom and my dad have done to her. And now that she moved closer to my brother and sister, my parents got my other siblings involved. She and her spouse our future spouse are not getting a break about how everybody's afraid of Sarah. So this is one of those, it's that trickery from the sibling that I have the closest relationship to is like, Sarah, I can't handle this anymore. Can you please just not come so that way we can enjoy our day? To my mom saying, I feel so horrible. My heart is breaking because you're not there. When in fact they quote unquote won, or they got what they wanted. And now she is playing the victim and blaming me for being the quote unquote problem.
Right. Well, and these are just examples from our personal life. Everyone listening here has probably had similar experiences.
Family drama.
And again, the whole point is not this specific example, but how do we learn to recognize it when it's going on so that we can then process and deal with it in a healthy way.
Right.
Yeah. So what's the next one?
So we're still on trickery. So the Mormon example that I'm giving of this undue influence is the 2015 policy that said children of LGBT parents could not get baptized until they were 18 and only if they disavowed their parents' lifestyle.
Yep.
That was then rescinded
2018.
In 2018. So 3 years later, it gets rescinded. And why am I saying this one is trickery? Well, because we got all of these talks of how it was a unanimous decision and everybody was just struggling with this decision. But then when you go back and check the history and where people were at when this decision would have come down the pipeline, we find that several of the apostles weren't in the room and were absolutely shocked when they heard that this had been done.
Also,
go ahead, Mason.
It was snuck into the handbook. If you're calling this a revelation, you don't sneak it into the handbook and not talk about it. That's just not the way that you do it. It's a trickery, underhanded way to get something that you want into the policy without even really talking about it.
Right. And the result of that was that, number one, we had a huge increase in LGBT suicide rates in highly concentrated Mormon communities. So especially visible in Utah, but we also saw those rates go up in Idaho and Arizona and parts of Washington, like in that what I call the Book of Mormon belt which is like that West Coast
Right.
strip.
Well, and why not? You basically just told them that they can't be saved. They can't go back to God because their parents are not living the way that you want. Well, let's go to, wait a second, Article of Faith 2. Let's talk about Mormonism here, right? We believe that a man will be punished for his own sins and not for Adam's transgression. Well, I guess that didn't matter to old Nelson, did it?
And once again, Steven Hassan's undue influence is used to cheat people out of their inheritance or property, break up families, deceive members into thinking that extreme shunning of close family members and friends is a loving act. Right. So we're going to shun children and call it love. And the other result of this... And it all
goes to that last one there, coercion, right? All of these things are to, you know what, we're going to try these things first, but eventually if you don't follow these things, let's get to the big one.
Right. Well, and what I was going to say before we move into coercion is what I saw with this policy is a bunch of faithful members saying, well, we don't need to understand it, but since it was revelation and it came from God, we're going to go ahead and hold this up. So under that undue influence, we now have millions of people holding up an atrocious policy that destroys families because of their blind trust in God. They did not listen to their own levels of discomfort and ickiness to say, hey, that's not really cool. And this is really contradictory to the foundations of our belief because, well, it came from the prophet, therefore it came from the God, therefore we are going to hold this up. And this, because it comes from God, we don't understand it, but it has to be loving because it came from God. They're like in a, like mental contortion trying to make this work. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah, you actually kind of clarified what I was going to pull up. You said that it was their faith in God, but really you've skipped the part of, well, actually it's faith in leadership that you believe are getting direction from God. But Mormonism and religion, a lot of times will do this. Mormonism is so good at it. They tie their gospel together with God and Jesus and all those things so tightly that it's sometimes impossible and certainly difficult to unwind the two and recognize that you can believe in Jesus without believing in Mormonism. Mormonism they don't teach that that's possible.
Right. Something that Steven Hassan also points out on here that we'll be going more into tomorrow when we talk about control of behavior with regards to financial things. So tomorrow we're going to be breaking, or I'm sorry, not tomorrow, but the next
following week, our next one.
Right. Next week, we're going to be talking about the financial exploitation that kind of makes the Mormon church fall into that cult thing. And one of the things here that Steven Hassan says that we'll re-quote again next week is, to compound the problem, society loses in the following three ways. And then we're going to talk about right now, way number 2, which is a big deal in the media today with the SEC fine, is that while a group may receive billions of dollars from its members, they often do not put that money back into society to help people other than the cult leadership. And what we know was that oh goodness, what's the name of their bank? Deseret.
Ensign Peak?
Ensign Peak, yes. Ensign Peak's only ever had 2 withdrawals, and those withdrawals were for-profit bailouts that protected investments made by people in high positions of leadership.
So we'll go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, we're going to definitely go into that one later. So, but we want to kind of point out that there's that undue influence in the sense of we're also deceptive in what we're doing behind the scenes. And we're not actually following through with the tenets that we claim are the most vital to practice. The last one, Mason, that we have on here is coercion. And that, the one that Mason brought up was baptism. So Mason, I'm going to go ahead and let you explain that since that was the one that you wanted to talk about today.
Well, and I think I just want to throw out a few principles here. You're talking about the church seems to translate because the Doctrine and Covenants says that you reach the age of accountability at 8 years old. meaning that from that point on, what you do, you're accountable for. First off, no. For anyone that has ever had children, no, you know that not. Now, some 8-year-olds have a good understanding of the fact that they did something wrong. It was stupid. They shouldn't have done it. And other 8-year-olds, no idea.
Right.
It doesn't matter how many times you've told them, no idea that that was wrong. So the age of accountability is like, whatever, right? But then if you take into...
You're usually 8 in second or third grade.
Right.
So...
Well, and I get that the church's reasons are all about training someone. Okay, fine. But then recognize it as that. Recognize this as a training. Well, what's another way to talk about training? Maybe
brainwashing, indoctrination.
Yeah.
Well,
all
and
those
again,
things.
Like we said last week, we practice indoctrination or brainwashing for things like capitalizing letters at the beginning of the sentence and multiplication facts and those types of things. But the expectation is when you're an adult, if you decide to do it differently, we're not going to withdraw love, support, and community from you.
Right. So a couple other pieces of that. If an 8-year-old decides not to get baptized, and first let's just talk about that. How many 8-year-olds, given the influence of two parents who want their child to do the quote unquote righteous thing, how many 8-year-olds are going to have the fortitude or the support to say, nah, I don't want to get baptized right now?
Some of them.
Some will. Absolutely. But most
no.
are not in a safe place where they could do that. Parents would, if my child came to me and said, I don't want to get baptized, what would I do? I would sit down them and I would say, let's talk about it. 5 years ago, I just sat down and said, let's talk about it. Let's talk about why you need to be baptized.
Right. Let's talk about the importance of baptism.
Right. So that you can understand why this needs to happen. But I now will recognize that is undue influence. I'm convincing my child to make a choice that isn't really a choice.
Well, and you brought up, Mason, earlier that there's a lot of societal pressures. So the real question is, how do I tell if it's undue influence? Well, what happens if the child says no? And it's that the consequences that come that are going to be able to tell, is it undue influence? So you're going to have, the bishop or the bishopric asking questions about it, the primary presidency asking questions about it, home and visiting teachers asking questions about it, other Mormon family members asking questions about it. It becomes everybody's business. And you're also going to have societal pressures, my best friend Susie Q over there got baptized and look at her pretty announcements and look at her pretty dress. And
How exciting was that? She got a party. Yeah.
So on and so forth. But then the third one is even from the church. If you wait until you're 9 to get baptized, now you are, quote unquote, wasting the missionary's time because now the 9-year-old has to take the Mormon discussions from the missionaries.
They can't just get baptized anymore.
In order to get baptized because now they're 9 years old, which seems absolutely ridiculous.
Right. You can't even have a parent go into the bishop and say, you know what, little Johnny, he wasn't ready at 8 years old. I think he's ready now. Why don't you talk to him? And the bishop can say, you know what, I agree with you. Let's do this now. He has to take the missionary discussions at 9 years old. He has to be further indoctrinated by adult missionaries who are teaching him the truth, quote unquote.
We say adult missionaries. He's going to be taught by 18,
an adult to
19, and 20-year-old boys or girls. And I love my 21-year-old, and I loved myself and had an awful lot of self-confidence in my 20s that was very short-sighted.
I talked about that in my solo episode, just the things that, I had a pretty high opinion of myself. And I think that's normal. Like, I'm not beating myself up for it.
It's a developmental level.
But I'm also recognizing it. Yeah. And so they're an adult. And my point was that 18-year-old is an adult to that 9-year-old kid.
Right.
Now you've brought in 2 more adults to exercise this influence, quote unquote, which we would call undue influence on this 9-year-old child to do what they have to do to gain salvation.
Right. And we actually see the same type of thing when it comes to going through the temple ceremony the first time, because temple prep doesn't actually tell you anything about what's going on in the temple. It's more
nada.
It's more an adult review of all of the basic tenets of Mormonism. So if you grew up Mormon, then that class is absolutely worthless because you're really not learning anything new, because you're learning the same things over and over again. And then you're expected to go in, and they give you the opportunity to step out if you're uncomfortable. So yay. And I know that they've changed it recently to say you're going to, learn some handshakes and some tokens and some names and whatnot before you do it. But you don't get to visually see it because it's quote unquote sacred or secret or confidential. And so you have no idea what you're promising until you're in the middle. And other than at the very beginning, before you know anything, where they say if you're uncomfortable, you can go. They don't offer you that option again.
Yeah.
And your family is there, and you can't get married in the temple unless you complete it. You can't
Shunning
go on
galore, right?
Right. You can't go on your mission if you don't receive it.
Yep.
And how embarrassing.
There goes that guy that was in the temple and couldn't go through with it. Yeah. So it's funny at the end of, so we're going to listen to 2 clips from this Elder Bednar thing that he did in South America. But at the end, he says this, he's like, he was talking about the penalties and everything that comes from not living your covenants. He says, I don't want to scare you, but...
So let's take a quick commercial break. Unpacking Mormonism. We'll be right back.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
I'm scared. As soon as you say that, I don't want to scare you, but I'm scared. You've made me scared. If I wasn't scared before, I'm scared now because you said that. So it's I don't even know, it's an oxymoron. It's something that you say to kind of give you some plausible deniability.
So you mean I'm sorry, but?
Right, exactly. You're saying the right words, but you are also sending the message that you wanted to send.
So my mom's email.
Right.
I'm brokenhearted that you won't be at your sister's wedding, but your countenance changed in the
Well, that's because you had a tattoo.
Session.
That changed your whole countenance.
Yeah, well, your countenance changed in our last session where I basically set boundaries to say, unfortunately, because of the risk of dad abusing my kids again, we can no longer have contact.
Wait. You mean your countenance changed when you had to tell your father he won't hurt your children?
That is exactly.
That is such a shocker. Such a shocker. I can't believe you didn't keep your pretty Mormon face on when you said that.
Right. And
was that sarcastic? I'm
that
sorry.
Was
that
really
was
sarcastic, and I totally lost my train of thought. But it's the I'm really gonna miss you, but your countenance changed, and now I'm afraid of you. Mm-hmm. But maybe this is an olive branch, and I can reach out to you, and you can come back at a different time. And then she says, I will be anxious in a good way to welcome you back in. And I'm like,
so anxious for you to come back.
She's anxious, good, anxious, bad, anxious.
You
it's
couldn't
bullshit.
be within 100 yards of me without me being anxious, but I'm so anxious for you to come back.
Squirrel. So my grandparents live directly behind my parents. So I went to their house and visited with them for maybe an hour and a half the last time I was in Arizona. And then I left. I didn't see my parents. They knew I was there, so that way, we wouldn't bump into each other, whatever. I spent 90 minutes with my aged grandparents. They are both in their late 80s, just for a short visit because that's all they can tolerate. They're in their late 80s, right? Just to, I love you, and how are you doing? And my family's doing great. Didn't talk about my parents at all. And then My mom apparently was in a complete terror because I was next door to her.
Yeah. You know why? This is all conjecture. Maybe I shouldn't say why, but one of the reasons, and it just demonstrates that they're talking about you.
Right.
So it makes sense that when you visit her parents that you would be talking about them.
Yeah, but we didn't.
But you don't.
Yeah,
you
we
just
talked
don't.
about, honestly, what we talked about was some of the mood instability my grandfather is experiencing as he's dipping into the development of dementia. And I provided some recommendations of how he could get care.
And he's doing better, right?
And he's doing better because I wrote it on a paper, and my grandma took that paper to the doctor, and the doctor was like, hey, yeah, this makes sense.
Right,
and,
let's do it.
You know, grandpa's doing better. That's what we talked about. I didn't talk about them, but yes.
All right, so what's next now as we talk about undue influence?
So the last one that I want to talk about is this, including hypnosis, because I know that a lot of our listeners are going to be like, well, there's no hypnosis going on in the church. But really, and I cannot remember what Luna calls it, but they had a very specific word for it that I will see if I can find while you're playing those
Obviously,
clips.
no one has ever listened to Richard G. Scott or Joseph B. Worthland.
Right, but one of the things so trance induction, that's what it's called. Trance induction and dissociative states. That is the term that Luna Lindsey Corbden used in their book, Recovering Agency, Lifting the Veil of Mormon Mind Control. And really what happens is there's a cadence or a tone of voice that lulls them to sleep. But the other piece of that is the fact that the Mormon church teaches the same thing over and 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 over again. So that way, when you get in there, you kind of go into this trance-like state where your subconscious brain starts to kind of pick up and absorb the repetitive information differently.
I only counted, I think, 10 overs there. You might have been a little bit shy of what the quota should be for over and over and over and over again.
Thank you. Thank you, Mason. When I was growing up, we had the primary manuals, and these were the same primary manuals I think that they used when I was in primary. They were using the same ones when I was the primary president in my late 20s.
Probably.
And then they did away with those. They didn't do away with the primary manuals for a long time, but they were the same, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, New Testament, Old Testament lessons, and they just rotated every year for decades and decades. And then same thing for young women's. They had a set
same thing for adults
curriculum, and then for the adults, and it was the same thing for years and years. Then they did the Come Follow Me stuff, and now it's the same topic every year, but it's not a manual. It's come up with your own topics on this. But I think it's like, for that week, your sacrament meeting talk, your youth talks, your Sunday school talks, they're all the same topic.
Yes.
So when you go,
in theory, they're all the same set of information, but in reality, what they end up being is you're talking about all the same things.
All day long. And
because if once is good, 3 times is better.
Right. And I think it stays that way with the youth curriculum. It's that way for the whole month. Because it's the same.
Well, sort of, yes.
I mean, you might have a different piece, but it's the same idea that you teach for the whole month. And then they just rotate through those now every single year. And it's the same thing over and over and over and over.
Well, in the microscopic view, you might not see it that way. But if you can pull back and see kind of a macroscopic view, that is what's going on. Yeah.
And it's not a continual learning thing. It's not like elementary school where in kindergarten we do math every morning at 10, but we continually add to your knowledge base.
In high school now you're doing trigonometry,
Right. By the time you graduate from high school, you've got a basic idea of calculus and trig so that you're ready for college algebra, college statistics, college blah, 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 blah.
Exactly.
We're not
There's
really
no progression of learning.
Right. There's a max out. I would say by the time you graduate from primary, you've got everything, that all the foundations that you need. And then after primary, you're really learning how to teach it back to other people.
I don't know if I would agree with that, but
you're wrong.
I don't have to agree with you on that.
Right.
That's just, everyone's going to see that a little differently. RFM talks about that, how it's kind of, 6th grade and he graduated and that kind of a thing.
Right. Well, he says graduated. I feel like I outgrew it. I wouldn't say I graduated. I just outgrew it. It didn't work for me anymore. Okay. So the last thing I wanted to point out on the Steven Hassan worksheet here that we've been using is undue influence occurs. This is a quote again. Undue influence occurs when the overall effect of the methods to control behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions promotes dependency and obedience to some cause, leader, or group. Members of pseudo-religious groups and cults subjected to undue influence can live in their own homes, have 9-to-5 jobs, be married with children, and still be unable to think for themselves and act independently. And I think, Mason, we talked about this in a previous episode. We saw this recently when your family was out to visit and you saw your mom answering questions or critical, questions meant to promote critical thinking. You saw her using kind of those scripted answers that you had used before. And one of the reasons I think that is because of lessons such as what Mason's about to share with you, the clips from Bednar.
Sure. We ready for the first one?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
The principle of moral agency is the least understood of all gospel principles. It is taught incorrectly often, and it leads people to behave in ways that are not appropriate. As I listen to members of the church all over the world, this is how they define agency. It's the ability to choose, and I can do what I want. That's false.
So I think that free will is exactly that. I can do what I want to. I can choose for myself. So Mormons tend to, we like to what's called loading the language, which is giving different words to describe things. We like to change the meaning of words. And so in Mormonism, we use the words free agency or agency, but that means free will or having freedom of choice. I've always believed free will to be, I can do what I want, but there's going to be consequences. So like with the law, if I choose to speed, I take on the risk of getting a ticket, paying a fine. If I do that a lot, I'm going to lose my license. But a cop is not going to get into my car and give me a little speeding modulator in my car in order to make me do it. So Mason, did you find what you're looking for?
Yeah, so 2 Nephi chapter 2, verse 27, this is Lehi teaching his children. He says, "Wherefore men are free according to the flesh, and all things are given them which are expedient unto man, and they are free to choose liberty and eternal life through the great mediator of all men, or to choose captivity and death according to the captivity and power of the devil, for he seeketh that all men might be miserable like unto himself." What really gets me about this is, once again, black and white thinking. You're talking about the agency. You're free to choose, but really the only choices are you can follow God, you can follow Satan.
Right, there's no in between. Well, and what's really bothersome to me here in a little bit is that Bednar's going to say, you don't have that choice. You're giving it back to God, and then you're going to choose the right. But who defines what right or wrong is? That's the church. So when we come back to Steven Hassan, who says here, where is it? This methodical system of control, undue influence, disrupts the person's authentic identity and reconstructs a new identity in the image of the group or leader. In the process, an individual's ability to think rationally and act independently is undermined, enslaving even the brightest, educated, and most functional people. And they do that through teachings like this that on the surface sound good. Like, I want to do the right. I want to do good. I want to do what God wants. But who makes those rules? And what are the consequences for not following them? So Mason, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, he takes the idea that because I'm supposed to do it one way, then I don't really have the choice to do it one way. And it's just...
Whoa. Say that again. That didn't make sense.
So basically he's making the argument because what you're supposed to do is follow God, you don't really have agency. because you're choosing to follow God, and it just doesn't track. It's not a rational,
Right.
It's not a rational conclusion. It's kind of a slippery slope sort of a thing.
But it's a sneaky, non-rational conclusion.
Yes.
Like with this email from my mom, I emailed it to my aunt and I said, hey, can you read this? I just need a second set of eyes on it. And my aunt emailed me back or texted me back and said, I read it. I need at least several hours to really process what I just read before I comment on it.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
And I believe the reason is because at first glance, my mom's email might look very loving, and you have to kind of back away from that desire to have the emotional need, that deficit filled, in order to break it down. And so for me, I read it and it made me furious. And then I was like, step back, read it again without the emotion. Like I had to make a choice to like turn my emotions off. So what do you do when you recognize you're the victim of this? Step away, take a break, and evaluate it when you're in a better brain space, when your amygdala's calmed down and you're soothed and you're in a better brain space, and re-engage with the information from a non-emotive space, from an analytical space. What is this person actually saying? And when I did that, I was like, look, I'm being blamed there. I'm being blamed there. There's this pseudo, I'm partially to blame, and then it's followed up with, but I'm doing it because I'm afraid of you, because you had a countenance change when you told Dad and I that there was to be no contact, but there's no acknowledgement as to why I asked for no contact. Like that part's not there. And what is there is your dad isn't who he used to be, which my mom has been saying for the last almost 20 years, that my dad isn't who he used to be. And okay, sure, but it was only in 2018 that he bloodied my now 9-year-old child's lip. She was 3 or 4 when he bloodied her lip in an abusive tantrum that he had because she ate a tortilla chip in his living room. And I mean, that's when people are like, no, it had to have been something else. No, well, he wasn't feeling well, but Eric, my oldest, was eating the tortilla chips at my dad's feet. So Dad's sitting in a chair. Eric is sitting on the floor at his feet. Eric is eating this chip and salsa. Abby walks in, swipes a chip from Eric's plate, pops it in her mouth. My dad jumps up, jams his finger into her mouth to remove that chip, and bloodies her lip, which didn't make any sense. Why can one kid eat but another one can't? That was when I stood up to him and everything started to deteriorate. He can't acknowledge, I'm not letting you have contact with my kids because this was not a once in a lifetime thing. This is almost every visit we have incidents like this. No more contact.
Right.
So, but there's no acknowledgement of that. It's just, we've changed. You need to forgive us and see how good we are today.
Yeah.
So, again, it's this like twisting of reality that sounds good and that gets all of your feels going. But once you step back and look at it without that emotion, when you're able to detach yourself from what you really want. I want to be a part of my family. I am not excited about not having any contact with my family.
Right. It's not our preferred.
Right. It's a
state.
It's a slight twist. It's a minor manipulation. You know, we all talk about forgiveness is a good thing. Forgiving us because we're different today than we were, but there's no acknowledgement, which also then I would say most likely no change towards my very challenging special needs children.
Yeah,
That's
well,
the
and
issue.
she can say that he's different than he was 20 years ago. Fine, most of us are. That's not the problem. We're not sitting here saying that your dad hasn't changed at all. We're sitting here saying that your dad has not changed on this issue.
And it's
This
dangerous.
thing where he is not treating me and my children with respect. This thing, that's the problem. It's not that he hasn't changed. It's this thing right here. And so you can make all these concessions. Yeah, but he is so much better. Okay, fine. I can accept that. He's not better where I need him to be better. And because it's not safe, I'm staying away.
Right.
So, yeah. You know, Luna says something in their book that I read. I wrote it down, but like somebody was going and listening to and already knowing that this organization was a cult. They were going in there really just to study the way that they're doing recruitment. And we're going to talk about recruitment later. But they said that even knowing what I knew, by the end, I was swept up in the emotion and I had to detangle myself from it because I found myself sort of getting convinced, even knowing what I know. And so it can be really important to say, whoa, this just like pissed me off. Let me step back. Let me take some time to process the emotion and then go back to it with a more level head or an academic brain.
Well, and that's because if we can hijack somebody's emotional state, we have a lot more power to muddle up their rational, logical thinking. And as a mental health counselor, I'm here to tell you our emotions are vital to our survival.
Right.
They're informants. We need them and we need to spend time with them. But when we get into that emotional, that highly charged emotional state, our logical reasoning goes goodbye-bye.
Right.
I mean, when I am head over heels in love with somebody, I've got rose-colored glasses. I can't see any of the bad things. We've all been there. If you are listening to this, you have most likely been there. It's not always a bad thing. It's important for us to be able to step away from the emotion and look at it with our analytical brain. And that's one of the best ways or best things that you can do to protect yourself when you're the victim of undue influence. So Mason, why don't you go ahead and listen to the second Bednar clip that we've got, where he really goes in and says, you've got to choose the right, but who determines what that is?
That we will keep the commandments. Have you heard someone say, a member of the church who has entered into the baptismal covenant, I have my agency, I can do what I want? You ever heard that? Yeah, you know what the answer is? No, you can't. You don't understand agency. You don't have agency to do whatever you want. We have the hymn Choose the Right, don't we? In Espanol?
Tenemos el himno, Haz tú lo justo.
The hymn is called Choose the Right, not Choose What You Want.
For the little blips that are in there, just so you know, this video, it was there was a Spanish translator, so the
right,
video,
they were in South America.
It pulls out the translation so that it's just the English part.
So who determines what the right is? The church does.
Well, yeah, they control your access to the doctrines of the gospel, right?
Right,
which means they control your access to Jesus Christ
and
and
most
salvation.
Mormons are going to say, no, they taught me good morals and good values so that I could determine the right for myself. But in Mormonism, if you don't choose the Mormon prescribed, quote unquote, right, what happens? You're not allowed to enter the temple. You've got to confess stuff to your bishop to be in good standing. You have to lie to stay in good standing. You'll get ostracized. You'll get cut off from your family. Look at the hundreds of thousands of people who have left. Go over and listen to the Mormon Stories podcast and listen to how many of those individuals talk about being shunned or kicked out of their communities or thought of as dangerous. I know at our house, people loved coming over and hanging out. They would let their kids come over and hang out. We did lots of activities with lots of the youth. Sarah left the church nobody
Crickets.
comes back over anymore because now my home is not safe. And it has nothing to do with their actual safety. It has to do with the preconceived notion that I've been influenced by the devil.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. It's on my screen actually. So, and there's subtitles here, but I just want to say the next line that came from Bednar is this. So from tonight on, don't ever use a misunderstood concept of agency to justify sin.
Oh, why don't we just listen to Bednar say it? Like, can you just put your microphone there and hit play again? Let's hear Bednar say that.
Tonight on, don't ever use a misunderstood concept of agency to justify sin. You can't just choose what you want. And when you begin to understand that principio, then you're on the road to becoming spiritually self-reliant, dependent upon God, and devoted to representing Him all the time, everywhere.
Spiritual self-reliance
But dependent on God.
equals what?
Dependence on God.
On the church.
Yeah.
Spiritual self-reliance means not choosing what is best for you, but rather choosing the right as prescribed by the Mormon church.
Yep.
If that is not undue influence, I don't know what is.
Because they hold all the cards. If you want to get to the celestial kingdom and live with God again, if you want to be with your family again, they hold all the cards. You have to do it their way. There is no other way. You go to another Christian church, you go to a Muslim, whatever, it doesn't matter. You will not get those things. If that's
According to Mormonism.
According to Mormonism, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
If that's not undue influence, I hold all the cards. You will do what I say. I'll go back to what Lehi said in 2 Nephi 2. You can choose life or you can choose death.
Right.
There is no other way.
Yep. Undue influence. So how do I know if I'm utilizing undue influence to get my way? Because that's really unethical and it's not healthy. Most of us will do this naturally and not even think about it because this is a human tendency. And then the issue is that people in positions of power will get to a place where they become so comfortable with it that it really becomes an ethical issue. But I'm going to say, check yourself. Are you getting people to do what you want through deception, flattery, trickery, coercion, hypnosis, love bombing? Are you being like a little bit sneaky in there?
Well, and even just go back to that first statement. Are you trying to get people to do what you want?
Well, and I'm going to say everybody does that.
I know, but if you're trying to get people to do what you want, you're already on a path that leads easily to manipulation. It doesn't mean it has to, but it can.
I'm going to put some caution tape on that because the way that you state that, Mason, feels almost like that black and white thinking that if you're trying to get people to do what you want, you are. So I would say shift that to if you're trying to get people to do what you want, check your intent. Check. And that, again, can still be dangerous because we might think it's right, but really is, are you taking somebody's agency, somebody's free will in order for you to be more comfortable? Watch these words, the deception, the flattery. Watch them. Check in with yourself because there are times where I am trying to get my kids to do what they want, but my overall goal is to teach them how to be dependent on themselves when they grow up. So like I'm going to probably use bribery in the beginning to teach my now 12-year-old how to do his own laundry as an incentive so that way when he moves out of the house, he knows how to do it himself. Is that undue influence? No, I'm teaching. What's the outcome if he doesn't do his own laundry? Well, then we talk about natural consequences. So you've got to check that intent. But if you are deceiving or use tricking or flattery, like, there's there's some issues there.
That's what I mean by checking. If I am trying to get someone to do what I want, I need to step back and check, is that really what's going on? Because if you use your laundry situation, yeah, I want them to get their laundry done, but ultimately what I really want is for them to be able to do their own laundry. And so you just have to walk the path. Where do I go from here? Am I exercising undue influence? Am I trying to coerce my son into doing what I want? Well, in that case, I can go, you know what? No. But I also can step back and go, you know what? That is really what I'm focused on. How do I change up what's going on here? For me, it would be easier, I think, to focus on, am I trying to get them to do what I want? And step back and say, where am I at here? For others, it might be easier to recognize, you know what? I just totally coerced my son, or I just totally lied to him. What's going on here? So wherever it works best for you, the point is self-reflection. What's going on here?
Right. So in closing, what do you do when you're the victim? We've already talked about separating yourself emotionally and analyzing. I sent my mom a response that I feel was very non-emotive, but also very, very direct. And my response was, Mom, a real olive branch would be reaching out to, changing the name here, Charlie, and telling her that you and Dad can manage your anxiety so that my family is not excluded in this once-in-a-lifetime event. A real olive branch would be owning up to the fact that y'all have talked so badly about me behind my back that Joey, again name change, threatened not to come. A brother who has spent less than 5 days with me or my family in 24 years. A real olive branch would be demonstrating that I am still valuable in this family. I have been kicked to the outside since I was 16. For more info on that, read my upcoming book. There's my little plug-in for the day. My plan was to sit with Nana and her 2 children, who I'm not going to name in here. I'm mature enough to be cordial. I explained to Charlie that that was my plan months ago. A real olive branch looks like not putting Charlie and making a name up right now, Jameson, in the middle of your triggers and making them feel responsible to exclude a family member so they don't have to conduct a balancing act when they are trying to celebrate. Fix that, then maybe we'll talk. Sarah. Please note that my goal was not to shame them, but rather shift the ownership back to them. Because being somebody who is mature and working on healing is identifying that your own triggers are yours to work through, and that blaming somebody else for them, that shifting of blame, the maneuvering around it, the love bombing, the soft, squishy language, the twisting of words, none of that is helpful. So for me, what I have found to be the best defense against undue influence is to separate from the emotion, analyze the situation, and respond directly without shame or blame. What I requested was for my mom to actually extend an olive branch, recognize that what she and my father said and did influenced everybody's decisions to exclude me from a hopefully once-in-a-lifetime familial event, and to say, we misspoke, we will manage our triggers because it's not the right thing to not allow a family member to come to a wedding because we're uncomfortable. Now, having said that, if my sister Charlie was uncomfortable with me being there, it's her wedding.
Completely different
Completely
situation.
different story.
Yep.
She can ask me not to come or just not invite me in the first place.
Absolutely.
But that's not the case here. The case is my sister was pressured into uninviting me because my parents are overly anxious with me just being in the room, not doing anything, sitting quietly at the back, giving, my sister a hug and hanging out with my Nana and my other uncle and aunt who I still have a good relationship with, but I'm not allowed to be there because it makes them that uncomfortable. That's the problem. My thing was in olive branches, owning your mistake, doing what you can to correct it so that I can be there because my sister and I, the one who's getting married and I, still have a really good relationship. When it comes to the church and recognizing the undue influence, if you're still in the church, evaluate and make sure that you are constantly analyzing how to navigate that elevated emotion, the manipulation, the shame game, those types of things. You're going to want to be on the, what is that book, Mason? The Inside of the Edge, where you keep your nuanced view and you don't absorb that shame and blame.
Right. There are ways for you to stay in this organization if that's what you want. It's all about education, recognizing what's going on, and then learning to deal with it in a healthy way.
Right. Continuing to evaluate, analyze, think critically, and maneuver without losing your identity. I hope that today's episode has been really helpful. Mason, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think so. We're going to be moving right into some other things and talking about some of this more. I hope that this is helpful. We're trying to just throw a bunch of stuff out there, but talk about the really important points of what now? Where do I go now? I'm starting to recognize this because this isn't just a church, right? This is a spouse. It is parents. You see this kind of stuff in all kinds of situations. Recognition is how we start to deal with it and how we heal.
Absolutely. And please remember to join us next week as we talk about still within our cult series, financial exploitation. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Love you guys.
Today's episode was hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook, produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. We would love to see you on our Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma Facebook page.
La 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 la.